Okay, go ahead, Eric. Thank you.
All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Eric Johnston. I know most of you. I'm a professor in the seminary and also the coordinator of Core 3 program at Seton Hall. And we're sponsoring this event, even though this is, I think, a graduate course, but Core 3, the core program is an attempt to have our undergraduate students engage with the Catholic intellectual tradition. And the first two courses are courses where students directly study texts from the Catholic intellectual tradition. But then Core 3 is an interdisciplinary course where we ask professors in the different disciplines to create courses that engage between their discipline and the Catholic intellectual tradition. And we really envision this as kind of a capstone of what Seton Hall does, of a way of seeing how all of the work that we do at Seton Hall can engage with our Catholic identity as a university, and engage us intellectually as Catholics. And I just really want to commend Father Laracy and Dr. Marlowe, who have really taken leadership in bringing this Core 3 movement into the sciences, and even into math. When the two of them came to me with a Core 3 math course, or a logic course, but within the world of math, that they found a way to engage between math and the Catholic intellectual tradition. I said that we have fully arrived at the, what we're looking for from this course, to be able to reach across disciplines and see how the Catholic identity of the university really can influence everything that we do. And this graduate course that Father Laracy is teaching is an extension out of this work, this undergraduate work in the Catholic intellectual tradition. So we wanted to sponsor it as part of a series within Petersheim of sessions that are specifically thinking about the Catholic intellectual tradition and how it influences scholarship at Seton Hall. So I'm not sure how you who all knows who, but Dr. Tom Marlowe has really been the leader in this and really an inspiration to me. And I think Father Laracy has also been under Dr. Marlowe's mentorship and guidance, and I just want you to appreciate how much great work is being done to try to create this deep sense of Catholic scholarship. And Father Laracy really a leader too on thinking about the intersection between Catholicism and scholarship. So I welcome you all to this Catholic intellectual tradition session of Petersheim.
Thank you so much, Dr. Johnston. Thank you for all you do, coordinating these Core 3 Engaging the World courses and providing that leadership to continue to advance Seton Hall's commitment to the Catholic intellectual tradition. Dr. Marlowe, would you like to say a word of introduction and welcome? You've been involved in the Petersheim for many years and have been very active in interdisciplinary work.
I'd like to say that this is a wonderful opportunity. I think we're establishing this as a pattern that I hope will continue for the future. And I also read the abstracts of all three of our presenters, and they look to me like they're going to be very interesting talks. I don't want to slow things up for people who are not planning to attend the math session in particular. Well, first I'd note that we have a core session coming up at 11 with 4 interesting talks from our interdisciplinary course, and then there's at least 2, maybe 3 talks in the afternoon from English courses in the core that also sound fascinating. So I'd welcome everyone, if you don't have other commitments, to attend those. Father, why don't you take control of your...
Thank you. Okay, so we'll begin now with a presentation from Father João Paulo of the community of St. John. Many of you know him from his work in campus ministry, and now he's a graduate student as well in the School of Theology pursuing a master's degree. And Father has engaged in a very interesting research space, putting the thought of St. Thomas Aquinas in dialogue with that of Viktor Frankl, the late great Austrian Jewish neurologist and psychiatrist. So I will give Father the ability to share his screen, and he can begin his presentation.
Thank you.
Okay, Father, you should be all set.
Yeah. Very good. Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay, let's begin here. All right, so thank you very much for welcoming me here. First of all, thank you for my English. If sometimes I don't pronounce words correctly or whatever you don't understand, don't hesitate to ask me if it's not clear. So my research, it was about God's guidance and meaning of life. And I'll explain why I call it God's guidance instead of God's providence. There is a reason for. And yeah, the goal is to create this dialogue between Viktor Frankl and St. Thomas Aquinas. And so the hypothesis is that by reading these two quotes from Viktor Frankl, I was wondering if it was not something very close to our theology of providence. Why? Because Viktor Frankl says that life is potentially meaningful under any conditions, even those which are most miserable. And by reading that, I was just wondering if we could understand in the way that God is guiding us under any conditions, even the most miserable. So it's also the question of evil here. So God's guidance and through evil. And then the next one, we need to stop asking about the meaning of life instead of ourselves as those who are being questioned by life. It's the same. It's maybe God guiding us through different conditions in our life, so presenting us the meaning of life. So we have here a lot of hypotheses that I had in my mind, and I was trying to understand if it was possible, if it was not possible, if it was like two different concepts, meaning and life, God's providence, and that's why I started this research. So the first question, why? Why it would be interesting to study it? First of all, because of the human theological dialogue that's established with a mutual and deeper understanding of God's guidance, leading us to our end, and many searching for meaning. It would be interesting to see if both aspects, human and theological, if they match. The second reason is the spiritual consequence. If God provides everything that we need to reach our ends, our suffering and meaning are meaningful, and we have strength to pass through them. By understanding that God's guiding us, it's going to be easy for everyone, easier, not easy, but easier for everyone to at least have this strength to keep on going in difficult times. And at the pastoral level, of course, because by learning to help other people how to deal with pain, they can still trust in God's guidance on them. So for the outline, that's my main questions. There are correlation between God's providence according to Aquinas and me searching for meaning according to Viktor Frankl. And as I try to do that as fast as I can. God's guidance and aim end of human life according to Aquinas. We see first of all three different concepts in St. Thomas Aquinas: providence, predestination, and divine government. Understand the connection between God's guidance and creation, since it's a class on creation, but more than that, there is an inner connection between both. What is the end of God's guidance and man's responsibility in St. Thomas Aquinas? and at the end to see if everything is provided by God, even evil. Then you'll be able to go to man's search for meaning, according to Franco, seeing a logotherapy in a nutshell. See also how he relates to the fact that life shows the potential meaning and finding meaning under any condition. And then you'll be able to compare both Viktor Frankl and Aquinas. Viktor Frankl was this Austrian neurologist, psychiatrist, and philosopher who spent 3 years in the concentration camps, I think 4 different concentration camps. And he created the logotherapy, while St. Thomas Aquinas was the angelical doctor who lived in the 13th century, and his main work is the Summa Theologiae that he wrote, but of course it's not the only one. So first, God's guidance and end of human life according to Aquinas. God guides man so he can achieve his end by answering to God's initiative. And that's the main, let us say, thesis of this part by studying St. Thomas Aquinas. First, it's important to distinguish these 3 concepts in St. Thomas Aquinas, and you understand why. First of all, providence. Providence is the type of St. Thomas Aquinas, the type, the ratio, or the plan of the orders of things towards their end pre-existed in divine mind. So it means that the providence is not the execution, is not the achievement of God's guidance, but it is something that's beyond time. It's eternal. It's something that exists already, pre-existed already in divine mind before being executed. And then you have predestination, and here it's very tricky because we have Calvin and everything that came after. But predestination is a part of providence, the part of providence that relates to human beings. Because while providence concerns all creatures, predestination is of a rational creature towards the end of life eternal. And you understand more this concept of predestination later. It's not a predetermination, I have to say right away. For St. Thomas Aquinas, it doesn't not exclude free will. And divine government, finally, it is the temporal execution of providence and predestination. So we have here 3 different concepts in St. Thomas Aquinas, which they are related, of course, to each other, and that's why we decided to call this whole reality by God's guidance, because there is a lot of nuance between among them. But to make it simple for us, I decided to call it God's guidance, the whole reality of the guidance of God. Then, from creation to God's guidance, what is the connection? First of all, the order of the Summa Theologica teaches about this relationship, because St. Thomas Aquinas writes, first of all, of course, the whole Summa is like only the order it's possible. From the order, it's already possible to see a great teaching of theology. It explains a lot about the thought of St. Thomas Aquinas. But the order of the Summa Theologica shows us that, first of all, he treats about providence before treating about creation, because it's something that it's in the mind of God, pre-existed in the mind of God, in the intelligence of God. And then after talking about creation, he comes to divine government. So there is an order, providence and predestination before time, before the creation, creation in itself, and then God's guidance. Because it's once the creation is there, we can talk about the execution of God's guidance. So Thomas Aquinas says that God is provident by the very fact that he is a creator. That's commentator Torel, French, who says that. There is an analogy of prudence, because God created us, because it's something that pre-existed in his mind, so there is this connection between providence and creation. He created us, and now he's leading us to the end. And that's the analogy of prudence that St. Thomas Aquinas used in order to explain this connection. Then The second aspect, it's because of his goodness, because he is good. It belongs to the divine goodness as it brought things into existence, so to lead them to their end. Because God's good and because God's wise, so he leads his creature to this end. There's a connection, inner connection here between creation and providence and God's guidance. So two reasons, his wisdom and his goodness make us understand why, by being creator, he's also the one who provides everything for us. So this precision, there are three different concepts in God's guidance. That's what we have already spoke in the past slide. The end of God's guidance and man's responsibility. We see that providence and divine government are connected to the end in the thought of St. Thomas Aquinas. It's because God created us and he wants to lead us to the end, to our end, that God so provides us everything that you need. And there is a difference here between rational and irrational creatures, and that's why you talk about predestination. And predestination for St. Thomas Aquinas comes from destinare in Latin, which means sent. And it's because we have a supernatural end, which is the union of God in heaven. We need to be sent by him. We are not able, we would not be able to go to heaven by ourselves, to reach our end by ourselves. So we need to be sent by God. But it doesn't, again, exclude our responsibility and our freedom. Because for human providence is included under the providence of God. Human freedom is included in God's guidance. In his providence, God has already included the fact that we have a free will and have a prudence. That's why the analogy of prudence also for God, it was important, because in the prudence of God, in the providence of God, he has already decided that our human freedom would be included in this, in our sanctification, let us say like that. The final end is, of course, God's vision and union with him in heaven, but you can already have some participation of this happiness here on earth, just some participation, of course, but not everything. But it's not on pleasure and power and honor, and St. Thomas Aquinas have a whole list of created things that can't give us our happiness. And finally, we have the whole segunda part of the Summa Theologica. After analyzing the providence, creation, divine government, now he comes to the second part, which analyzes how man responds to God's initiative by creating him and by guiding him. So it's the whole idea of how men respond with his freedom, cooperating with God's grace. And then finally, the last question is everything provided by God? Yes, of course, St. Thomas Aquinas says. Yes, because he governs or rules the whole of things by his providence. And two reasons why we can say that. First, because he created everything, again, the relationship with the creation. So since he created everything, he can't not guide his creature. And because of the end of his government, which is his own goodness. For us, the end is, of course, to reach God's vision, but from himself, he created us and he governed us so we can glorify his name. It's for his own goodness. So that's why he provides everything, according to St. Thomas Aquinas. Providence in itself does not use second causes, because it's eternal plan in God's intelligence. So we can't talk about any kind of second cause in the mind of God, since it's something that's before time, is eternal. But the divine government, yes, allows second cause because of God's goodness. God wanted that the creature participate to his providence, so the creatures could be perfect, could reach his perfection. by being part of divine government and divine providence. Not divine providence, sorry, divine government, God's guidance. And even evil, the evil of natural defect or of punishment, he does will by willing the good to which such evils are attached. So God can allow evil so we can have even a good that's better than this evil. And of course, the example of the cross is the most powerful example to show how our evil brought us our salvation. So first conclusions from here is that first, God guides everything. God guides man to achieve his end, and even evil, suffering, and disorders are included in God's guidance because he can we can have some good and even better than the evil that's provoked by the suffering disorders and every kind of pain. So this is the first thoughts for St. Thomas Aquinas. Now I'm gonna go back to my hypothesis, and when you read it again, life is potentially meaningful under any conditions and those which are most miserable. I think that you can already feel how we can create a dialogue between Franco and St. Thomas Aquinas. Second, main search for meaning, according to Franco. And for Viktor Frankl, life is potentially meaningful under any conditions, even those which are most miserable. Logotherapy is often called the therapy through meaning. This striving for meaning in one's life is the primary motivational force in man. And Viktor Frankl, he's not only a scholar who was there studying something just because of some ideas, that books that he read, but he's also from his own experience. Of course, the logotherapy was already being developed before he went to the concentration camps, but it's really there where he could, let us say, verify, check that, yes, he was right. And he developed even more after this experience of even this situation, such situation is still possible to find meaning. Meaning is source of order. Logos means meaning. It's always a question for me. And I was looking up on different dictionaries. I tried Greek, Portuguese, Greek, English, Greek, French, and none of them would give the definition logos as meaning. Of course, we could say that logos is definition, but at least for me, somehow it's not enough. And so I tried to understand why we would say that logos is meaning. And there is a very interesting article explaining how for the ancient philosophers, logos was source of order. And so we could say that logotherapy is it's a way to find meaning, and through this meaning, we can find order in our life, because meaning is source of order. And also, logotherapy, Viktor Frankl talks about the danger of masks, through which we can hide the meaning of life once you are tempted by the vacuum, existential vacuum. And these three masks are will to power, will to money, and will to pleasure. And the first time that I read that, I was very impressed by the fact that you can easily read here the three concupiscences, even though he's not Catholic. But we understand why I'm talking about that, why it's so important, because for St. Thomas Aquinas, also, he has a whole list of things, and you could like summarize all of that by power, money, and pleasure. The way that you can hide meaning of life and also prevent us to reach our end. Second, life shows the potential meaning. We are questioned by life. Life shows to us the potential meaning. For Viktor Frankl, have to stop trying to give meaning for our life, asking life what is our meaning, but life in itself shows us, and we are questioned by life. And so the question is more, how do I respond? What is my responsibility in this question that life gives me? And so mainly responsible for that. Responsibility Responsiveness is the very essence of human existence, which is a very strong statement from Viktor Frankl. The way that I respond to the question of life, it is what makes my life be meaningful or not. And it's free to act, to be good or mean, even though the conditions can, of course, be very strong, but he's always free, and he gives many different examples about what happened in the concentration camps. And man is not predetermined, as St. Thomas Aquinas also states. How can we find meaning? First of all, important point here is the self-transcendence that he talks very often. He speaks about this capacity of man to somehow to leave himself in order to reach something outside of himself and find meaning there. And he gives us 3 ways: creating a work, experiencing something or encountering someone, and the attitude toward unavoidable suffering. And that's here the point for the last point for this presentation, is that finding meaning under any condition, even the worst. Meaning is very powerful. Who has a why can bear anyhow. Like his quote here, Nietzsche. And that's what brings us strength enough to suffer. We can suffer as long as we have meaning. He talks about the tragic, optimism, death, pain, and guilt. And again, I want to here just focus on pain. And he says that it's possible to find meaning in suffering. If you know there is a goal, it's easier. It's not easy, but it's a little bit easier because, you know, for example, let us say, a college student. He has a lot of difficult times, but he knows there is a goal at the end. But even if I do not know, if there is always an opportunity to change myself, and that's how we can find meaning in suffering. And he talks, of course, about the necessity of tension in life to find meaning. Absence of tension would not be helpful for us to find meaning. There is always this necessity for us, this need to self-transcend and in order to achieve our end, our meaning. Sorry. And I'll finally compare Aquinas and Franco. First of all, the first point is that logotherapy is not a religious therapy. That's very important to notice, even though we are trying to create here a relationship, but it's not a religious therapy. Meaning and end are not identical, of course. There are 2 different concepts, but nothing is more meaningful than achieving our end, which is our union to God. If life shows us the potential meaning, it's because God guides us through every circumstance. By guiding us, we can find God. Because God guides us, we can find meaning in your life. Man is free to answer to life. That's what Viktor Frankl says. And St. Thomas Aquinas would say, man is free to cooperate with God's grace. And finally, there are masks which make us not fulfill our meaning nor achieve our end. It seems to me that the cross is the most meaningful way to lead man to achieve his end, and it's God's answer to evil. Thank you.
Excellent, Father. That was a fantastic presentation, putting 2 very important thinkers into dialogue. One, of course, from the Catholic intellectual tradition, one from a Jewish tradition, medical tradition, and beautiful to see how you connect the thoughts of these scholars that, without a doubt, changed the world through their witness. So thank you. Well, we have time for a question or 2. Does anyone have a question for Father Gianpaolo?
Guess the question is, even if you take God as giving the most of meaning, wouldn't both Aquinas and Franco agree that there are secondary meanings, secondary ways to extract meaning by being a collaborator, by providing help to others, and so on, whatever the sense may be that one can build secondary, auxiliary, partial, stepwise meaning out of our own actions.
Sure. Yes, sure. And I think that I haven't. I think there is a scale of values, and of course, I think that one point that's interesting, at least for Viktor Frankl, is that meaning is very is dynamic. There's no one meaning for man that I can find in general words and I can express. That's the meaning of my life. Even I think that he says that meaning can change often, meaning for my life. And I think that it answers maybe a little bit in the sense of there's not only one whole meaning and then everything else is not meaningful, but it's more every day life is showing me how can I answer to this meaning. And so I don't know if he used terms of secondary and primary meaning. Maybe I haven't read the whole, of course, Viktor Frankl. But at least what I can say is that he doesn't forget about all these conditions and all these situations where life can ask me to respond to meaning. So, and for St. Thomas Aquinas, the same when he says, of course, the union with God is the main end of our life, but it doesn't mean that here on earth I can't reach somehow, participate somehow to this end. And of course, from the end of our life, we can have the other, our situations and our lives, our actions becomes meaningful because all the commandments of the Lord, to love each other and to help each other, and everything's become meaningful because of this main end of man, which is the union of God. Don't know if it answer or help.
Thank you.
Dr. Lisa Rose Wiles, did you have a question?
I do find this very interesting, but one of the things that has always sort of puzzled me a little bit about Aquinas is coming back to this idea of predestination and the intersection with free will. And I'm sorry, I have a hard time getting my head around that.
Sure.
I'm sure a lot of people do, but I wondered if it's something that you wouldn't mind enlarging on a little bit, how the two fit together.
Sure. I want to say just first of all that I was quoting one French Dominican, Torel, which is one of, at least in France, one of the most well-known experts on St. Thomas Aquinas. And he, by commenting, by explaining a little bit, at the end, he says, just, there's a mystery there. So if he says that, who am I to try to explain better than that? But I think that we have in mind a lot predestination after the Reformation, Protestant Reformation. How do you call that? That's the correct word. Yeah. And so for us, predestination almost means yes, God sent some people to heaven, other people to hell, and that's it. There is no way to yes, it's already decided. And I think that it's, of course, it's not the thought of St. Thomas Aquinas. It's simply St. Paul. When you open St. Paul, he talks about predestination. But in the sense that, again, predestination means sent to, and to reach this end that's supernatural, which is above our power and our strength, we need to be sent by God. It doesn't mean that you can't cooperate with his grace, which he calls the cooperating grace, I think in English. He divides the different grace. And so he gives a grace to cooperate with him. So even our cooperation is already a grace to achieve our end. But that's interesting because St. Thomas Aquinas says that God sent people to heaven, let us say like that, but he never sent people to hell. Okay, the reprobation that he calls, it's not a direct will to send people to hell, but it's God allows people to go because of their acts. So that's what I think. Also, one interesting point to think about is a little bit the pre-knowledge of God, but that here also there is, I mean, it's too much to talk here in just one presentation. But in for St. Thomas Aquinas, God knows everything, even the future. So it's already in the mind of God that our free will be included in the providence of God. Doesn't mean that he's predetermining everything, but he knows everything. It's because God's beyond time. And so because of that, our free will can be included in the providence of God.
I think it's a mystery is a very good
It is. It is.
Thank you.
Excellent. Well, now we'll turn the microphone over to Father Joshua of the Diocese of Zaria in Nigeria. Father Joshua is one of our graduate students in ecclesiastical history. I've had the privilege of having him in a number of courses. Father, when he was in Nigeria, was very active in ecumenism and interreligious dialogue, and you'll see here this interest reflected in his study of Catholic and Muslim receptions of the theory of evolution.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for giving me this opportunity and this privilege to make my presentation. Sorry, maybe I don't know how to put it to slides so you could see, but
Father, if you hit that share button in the top right, and then you can hit the window and then choose your PowerPoint slides.
can you see it?
Right now we're seeing your file explorer. So maybe, did you click on the file?
Yeah, I did. Window.
Okay, we see it. Great.
Okay, you see it now?
Yes.
Okay. Well, first of all, I would like to say when you hear the word evolution, it's more scientific than theological. And so also when you hear the word creation, it's more theological than scientific. So at the beginning, the Catholic Church was a little bit resentful to the theory of evolution. So it was like a gradual reception to the theory. While in Islam, when they heard the word evolution, at first they didn't find it a problem, and then they didn't find it like any issue with the theory, and they felt it was okay for them because there are various accounts of creation spread all across the Quran, so they didn't find it as a problem. But later on, they started discovering that there is this danger of trying to deny that God is the creator of the universe. But the church saw that right from the beginning of the concept or the belief of the theory of evolution. So that was why it was a little bit resentful from the beginning, but gradually started studying it, and then to understand that, yeah, maybe it's possible. It's possible that it happened. It's possible that it's not. But let us give it a study and see. But permit me to begin on this note that the beauty and the order in the cosmos points to something responsible for its being. The question is, who then is responsible, and how did the cosmos come about? Now, following sacred tradition, theologians would say that God created the universe, and he created the universe out of nothing, and it's recorded in Genesis, in the creation account, most especially in chapter 1 and chapter 2. In Islam, God is the creator of the universe. They also have this belief too, that God created the universe. So when we talk about creation, creation points to a creator, and Islam call him Allah, while Christians, we call him God. But in the case of evolution, yes, science would say that the world came to be out of pre-existing matter, even though the causality of the pre-existing matter is not satisfactorily accounted for. The science of evolution seems to deny God as the creator of the universe. And this was part of the things that the church saw from the beginning. That was why it was a little bit resentful in the reception. So this is where the friction between creation and evolution lies. Creation points to a creator, while evolution points to a pre-existing matter. And that's why when we talk about creation, so like I said, theologians prefer to use the word creation, while science prefers the word evolution. So when we hear these two concepts, so we try to look at it from the theological perspective and then from the scientific perspective. Now, the theory of evolution did not start with Charles Darwin. And it's quite often when we talk about evolution, the first person we see is Charles Darwin. It has been traced as far back as Confucius, early Buddhism, and the pre-Socratic philosophers like Anaximander, Democritus, and then few others too. Like Anaximander, it has been recorded that he studied and then he discovered that the evolution process started in the water with fish. And then gradually, as he started stepping to land, started adapting and then started changing. So it has been recorded right and dating it back to the pre-Socratic philosophers. A lot of scholars paved way for Charles Darwin in the development of evolution, including his grandfather, Erasmus Darwin, and Jean-Baptiste Lamarck, who were 18th century deists who saw the progression of living things from simple to complex. Charles Darwin's achievement was to produce a large body of evidence that evolution had occurred and to provide an explanation for how it happened. So he made evolution a testable theory. This is where his contribution is coming from. Not that it started with him, but he made evolution a testable theory through his natural selection with the origin of species. I know that a lot of us are familiar with his book, The Origin of Species. So this has gained scientific support ever since. Now, looking at it and then relating it to the church, a lot has gone by, but a giant step towards the study and the acceptance of the theory of evolution in ecclesiastical parlance was made by Pope Pius XII. And then beginning from him, in fact, there are scholars who allude that from Pius XII to Francis, they call them the popes of the evolution, because it was from them we started seeing this giant step through encyclical and various addresses to the Pontifical Scientific Commission at the Vatican, that we started seeing this giant step towards analyzing, towards accepting, towards trying to understand what evolution is all about and relating it to theology. So Pope Pius XII, in his encyclical Humani Generis, he made a profound statement, opening theologians, opening philosophers to come to study and then look at evolution and then try to relate it with the Catholic theology and then with the Catholic belief. But in fact, he saw it as he called the theory of evolution a hypothesis. That was how he saw it, even though he allowed theologians and then to discuss and then to analyze and then to try to study it, relating it to Catholic theology. He seemed to disagree with evolution on one note. And that's, you find it in that encyclical in number 36, and I would like to quote him here. He says, the teaching authority of the church does not forbid that in conformity with the present state of human sciences and sacred theology, research and discussions on the part of men experienced in both fields take place regarding the doctrine of evolution, in as far as it inquiries into the origin of the human body as coming from pre-existing and living matter. For the Catholic faith obliges us to hold that souls are immediately created by God. And this will be a very important point when we are comparing and contrasting with Islam. Islam too, at some point, when they started this, when they started discovering, like, when we accept this theory, it's like trying to negate that God is the creator of the universe. So at some point, Islam will believe that, yes, in terms of the human body, we could talk about evolution from pre-existing matter, but not in terms of the soul, just trying to affirm what Pope Pius XII said. Pope Paul VI too made a statement during his visit to an important chemical pharmaceutical plant. And then relating to evolution, he was like, yes, the church is not against science. We could give it a trial. We could allow theologians to study and then to try to relate it with Catholic theology. But if they must do this, let them do it through the lens of Teilhard de Chardin, because he has an explanation of what it means to relate evolution with Catholic theology. But later on, it was like some theologians or some scholars would say, for Pope Paul VI to say this in his address is like trying to endorse the teachings of Teilhard de Chardin, because he was like saying Catholic theologians should look at evolution through the lens of Teilhard de Chardin. So him saying that means that he was endorsing. And by the way, his own views too. There is this pantheistic view with regards to his view concerning creation and concerning evolution. So at some point, it was a little bit problematic relating it to Catholic theology. John Paul II made a very profound statement too, in talking about when he was addressing the Pontifical Academy of Sciences on October 22nd, 1996, in number 4. He says, today, almost half a century after the publication of the encyclical of Pope Pius XII, Humani Generis, new knowledge has led to the recognition of the theory of evolution as more than a hypothesis. Pius XII would see it like a hypothesis. John Paul II would say this is more than a hypothesis. In his address, truth cannot contradict truth. So he says that theologians should go into this study and try to relate the two, because to him, he saw it as being complementary and not contradictory. Pope Benedict XVI says in his homily that inaugurated his pontificate, he says, and I quote, "We are not some casual and meaningless product of evolution. Each of us is the result of a thought of God. Each of us is willed. Each of us is loved. Each of us is necessary." This was the statement that inaugurated his pontificate. And this was the first statement he made regarding evolution. So here, what Benedict XVI is saying is like, we are not just a product of evolution, as it is held by some scientists trying to negate that God is the creator of everything in the world, including human beings. Pope Francis too, in his own address to the Pontifical Academy of Sciences, has this to say. When we read the account of creation in Genesis, we risk imagining that God was a magician, complete with an all-powerful magic wand. But that was not so. He created beings. And that's why I said, when we talk, a theologian prefers to use the word creation, because creation points to a creator than evolution, which is more scientific, especially when we talk about human existence. So he created beings and he let them develop according to the internal laws. So this is in a way trying to complement, trying to say that, yeah, there is room, there is possibility for evolution here. When he made this statement, he created beings. Yes, God created, and he let them develop according to the internal laws with which he endowed each one, that they might develop and reach their fullness. He gave autonomy to the beings of the universe at the same time in which he assured them of his continual presence. So in a way, even though it takes place, we can't remove God from it. So God is also there. And thus creation has been progressing from centuries to centuries, millennia to millennia, until becoming as we know it today. Precisely, God is not a demon or a magician, but the creator who gives life to all beings. The beginning of the world was not a work of a chaos that owes its origin to another, but derives directly from a supreme principle who creates out of love. Yes, even though the internal laws are there, we cannot exclude God as the way some scientists see it. Like when we talk about evolution, we are removing God as the creator out of pre-existing matter, like I said from the beginning, but accounting for that pre-existing matter, the causality of that pre-existing matter was not satisfactorily accounted for. Now, looking at Islam, on the other hand, concerning the theory of evolution, from the beginning, it's like Islam did not have a problem because there are various accounts of creation in the Quran. They didn't really have a problem with it. Hope you know that in Islam, faith is like more important and rated high than reasoning. So from the beginning, they didn't see it like as a problem. It was accepted. It was when that denial, it's like when we accept this theory, there is a denial that God created the universe. So this brought about the emergence of so many schools of thought in Islam. And I just have 4 here concerning the theory of evolution. First of all, there are 4 schools of thought concerning evolution in Islam. The first is creationism. The second is human exceptionalism. The third is Adamic exceptionalism. And the fourth is no exception. So what is the school of thought of creationism saying? Creationism says that, and do not believe that Adam, human beings, and non-human beings are product of evolution. So here, it simply means that evolution is just a sham. Evolution never takes place, and nothing ever came out of evolution. God is the creator of everything. So this school of thought denied evolution. The second school of thought, human exceptionalism, believes that non-human beings are product of evolution, except for human beings and Adam. And now this is it. Non-human beings are product of evolution, except for human beings and Adam. So everything came out of evolution with the exception of you and I, and then our first parent, Adam. The third school of thought, Adamic exceptionalism, believes that non-human beings and human beings are product of evolution, except for Adam. What this school of thought is saying is only Adam that is exempted because he was created by God. By the way, Islam too acknowledges that we came through one descendant, Adam. So God created Adam and we came from Adam. Identifying and saying that, yes, our ancestor is Adam. So God created Adam. So that's why this school of thought exempt Adam from evolution, because God created Adam. But those that came subsequently after Adam went through evolution from Adam and not from God. So the last school of thought, no exception, is a school of thought that believes that non-human beings, human beings, and Adam are products of evolution. It's just like the opposite of creationism. Creationism says no, why no exception said yes. Everything came through evolution. So these are the 4 schools of thoughts through my research that I found out that Islam responded concerning evolution. Now, comparing and contrasting, the church and Islam, on a general note, are not against science and evolution. And you can see it from the various schools of thought. It's not all of them that says, no, we do not believe on evolution. Some believed and some do not. But on a general note, it's not as if Islam is against it. It's not as if Catholicism is against evolution. So like the Catholic Church, Islam believes on the dual nature of the human body and soul, of which the soul is created by God and is everlasting. It was raised in the encyclical of Pope Pius the the 12 Humani Generis, particularly number 36. Islam too is quite on this note that yes, not with the soul. The soul is God's creation and not a product of evolution. So Muslims acknowledge evolution regarding the human with regards to the human soul. And I believe it's the same thing too with us in the church. So the Catholic Church and Islam are not against the theory of evolution, but their major concern is its compatibility with the Catholic and Islamic tenets of faith. The reception of the theory of evolution in the Catholic Church and Islam is with a clause because of its complexity. This is the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Father Joshua. That was a great presentation, putting religion and science in dialogue, but also two religions, Roman Catholicism and Islam. So a very, very important project and exactly what we want to be about in the creation science course. So now we have time for some questions. Looks like Dr. Marlowe, go ahead.
As usual, I suspect, but Father, you in particular know my fascination with the Islamic Golden Age and the translations. In the Islamic Golden Age, the translators in the Middle East were making translations of the early philosophers who dealt with evolution, such as you cite, Anaximander and Democritus and so on. Have you seen anything from, say, the 9th through 13th century of any commentary on those philosophers that might relate to evolution?
Well, in the course of my study and research, I have not come across that yet. And that's why when I was making the presentation, I put the different school of thought that and the proponents of those who fall into the category of this school of thought. From the beginning, in fact, in one of the sources I happened to lay my hands on during the research, they said they had no issue and no problem with evolution. In fact, they were alluding the fact that Charles Darwin copied from Islam. In fact, his belief came from Islam because Islam had no issue with evolution. So it's like gradually a modern thing because of the tendency of trying to remove God as the creator of the universe and of everything in the universe. So just like the way in Catholicism, we're very slow from the beginning to accept it. So this denial started coming slowly too, and then in recent times.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Dr. Rose Wiles.
Yes, thank you, Father, for such an interesting presentation. And I probably should say before becoming a librarian, I was a biological anthropologist, and I've done, a lot of work on evolution. So two things. One is just sort of a little grumbly point that, when people in Islam talk about everybody being descended from Adam, they're kind of neglecting the fact that you cannot have a male ancestor without females. I think that's sort of a little misogyny there.
Exactly.
But that wasn't my main point. My question, and I don't think there's really an answer to that. I'm just interested in the theological perspective on this, that one of the things that has long puzzled us in terms of the human evolutionary record, of course, recognizing that the fossil record is very messy, very incomplete, huge pieces probably missing, but at what point we are actually talking about human. There's a great deal of disagreement amongst paleoanthropologists on this point, whether we're talking anatomically modern humans or where. But this comes into play when we talk about where the soul comes into play, right? At what kind of point evolutionarily we may be talking about. of course, I understand the argument that God is outside time, and therefore from that perspective, perhaps it doesn't matter. But I think this has been one of the points of contention among the scientific community in regard to creation, if that makes sense.
Yeah, you are right, and it's actually still open for research. One cannot say, and that's why it's the talk on evolution is very complex. Like when we look at it from the theological perspective, we will say, okay, at conception it takes place, but when it comes to evolution, we can't precisely say that this is the point that the so it's still open. Research is still going on, and this is the opportunity we have, you and I, to go into real study. And that's why the popes too are very open in their writings for us to analyze, for us to see, for us to study, because there is something very important. So it's still open for research for us to, like I said when I was presenting, Charles Darwin made it testable through his natural, again, for research for us to know from evolution, at what point did the soul get into the body. So it's still open for research till today. No specific answer yet.
Yeah, it's a fascinating question. And, I would love to see more theologians and paleoanthropologists working together on this. It doesn't seem to happen that often.
That's why we are talking about it here. So it's still open.
Of course, and I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's, something we've talked about in class, because it really is a complex question. And I don't think we can simply say it's okay with the start of Homo sapien, because when you look at Neanderthal seems to have culture. There's elements of art and religion, and we associate culture with being a distinctively human phenomenon. So it's a complex question, but definitely worth one digging into. And as you say, Lisa, that it really is an interdisciplinary question from anthropology, paleontology, theology. So now we come to our last presentation for this session. Deacon Chris Myers, a transitional deacon from the Diocese of Camden, New Jersey. He's a dual student in the Master of Divinity program, as well as the Master of Arts in Moral Theology. And this presentation is a great follow-up to Father Joshua's, in that we will continue in this space of engagement with evolutionary theory, but engaging the question of atheism, because some modern atheists would present non-belief as a necessary outcome of accepting evolutionary theory. And so Deacon Chris will now engage that question.
Thank you, Father. I'm going to try to load my stuff up real quick. Can everyone see?
Nope.
A minute ago, you had your screen up, but you need to go back to it, share it, and then go to slideshow.
Oh, okay, cool.
And I hope that works.
Perfect. So as Father said, I wanted to really dig into evolution and really try to get to a theistic understanding, especially in terms of a Thomistic, Aristotelian understanding, and in doing so, try to find, where where some evolutionists come up with this idea that you can't really be an evolutionist and a theist at the same time. So one of the prime examples of a neo-Darwinian atheist is the biologist Richard Dawkins, and he's been prominent before he passed away. He was very prominent in television and movies and talk shows. He had a best-selling novel, The God Delusion. In fact, in some cases, he was very denigrating to some people who to religion, to people who believed in God. And he was one of the proponents of this, that if you believe in evolution, you cannot believe in God. He actually writes, far from pointing to a designer, the illusion of design in a living world is explained with far greater economy and devastating elegance by Darwinian natural selection. So it really kind of begs two questions, which my study attempts to answer. Is that, does Darwin's theory of natural selection, of his theory of evolution, show that belief in God is incongruent with evolution? And if it doesn't, can we offer a theistic explanation of evolution? So this type of belief is not just rampant among, certain neo-Darwinian biologists. It's actually very prominent among biology students, college biology students. In fact, Elizabeth Barnes studied some the beliefs and surveyed college biology students, and among the students surveyed, half of them believed that you cannot believe in God if you accept evolution, which I thought is very interesting. I think it's something this is kind of an illustration of something that's prevalent in our culture today, that acceptance and belief in God is antagonistic of evolution. And I think Father actually addressed this very eloquently as well. So the first thing that I really did was I went through and kind of summarized The Origin of the Species by Darwin to try to see if there's anything that shows that he is against belief in God. And from Ernest Mayr, I've got a bullet point summary list of what Origin of the Species is really about. The first inference that Darwin makes is that there's a struggle of survival amongst populations. And he makes that inference from several facts. He says that every species is fertile enough that the population would grow if all the offspring survive to reproduce. So populations will grow if the each offspring reproduces. And despite some fluctuations in those populations, the populations remain the same size. However, resources such as food, they're stable. They don't grow. Like, there's limited food supply. Thus, he concludes that there's a struggle for that survival. And then the second inference comes from the variation in specific populations. And he attributes this variation to the heritability of traits. And he also notices that individuals less suited to an environment are less likely to survive and less likely to reproduce. Individuals more suited to the environment are more likely to survive and more likely to reproduce, and leave those traits, those heritable traits, to future generations. This is what produces natural selection. This process results in populations changing over time to adapt to their environments and ultimately accumulate these variations over time and form a new species. So that's basically the summary, but the question is asked, is there anything in there that is antagonistic to the idea of a creator? And I don't think so. I think there's a couple of points that he makes. Darwin even leaves the idea in certain quotes of a creator open. He suggests that God first created life, but life became subject to the laws of nature. So he's not exactly congruent with Catholic doctrine, but you could possibly classify him, based on Origin of the Species, as a theist, which I think is interesting. And he also says and suggests that any belief that each species was created independently makes God's work seem to be a mockery, suggesting still that theistic belief. And there's a lot of authors, including John Y., Walter Karp, who think that Darwin was no atheist, he was a theist. I do understand that there are some other writings where he might have suggested other things, but based solely on Origin of the Species, it seems that Darwin was very much a theist when he wrote that. Perhaps his beliefs changed. I don't know about that. So the next thing I did was just kind of analyze, where does Dawkins move away from Darwin? And, Darwin obviously is some say the founder and the foundation of modern biology, and I think he deserves much credit for that. But I think there's some biologists and evolutionary biologists who have what could be called pan-adaptionist views, meaning that every trait that an organism has comes from the environment. Changes in the environment comes from natural selection, and that's not quite the case in modern biology, from my understanding. That there are it's a lot more complex than that, and because of that, many people have labeled Richard Dawkins as sort of a Darwinian fundamentalist. So yeah, it's much more complicated than that. Modern textbooks in biology, they define evolution as the cumulative changes in a population over time. And even Spellman, he claims that no one alive today can definitively explain evolution. What he refers to here, though, is the mechanisms of evolution. Evolution is widely accepted as a theory that is true, but it's still kind of blurry in some sections from what I've seen through the research. And whereas Dawkins focused more on the gene and allele frequencies, and Darwin focused more on the individual. And today, modern evolutionary theories focus on the gene and allele frequencies, but within a specific population. So it's not necessarily individualistic. It's much more based on the population. And there's in the latter or in the formal ways of interpreting evolution, there was a big risk of this material understanding of evolution, specifically within Dawkins' understanding of evolution, that if you believe evolution from this sense, human beings and life we're just matter and nothing else, and that's sort of dangerous, especially when trying to come within to make Catholic thought and evolutionary thought in terms of Dawkins congruent. So now I kind of dove into some ideas in theistic evolution. There are a lot of hurdles, and specifically two authors that are really focused on: Hoffman, and he tries to come up with a way to use Thomas Aquinas to come up with a framework of theistic evolution. However, he's a little bit more cautious. He talks about Thomas's exegesis of Genesis, and that God created the first parents of every organism. So he talks about Thomas's exegesis as being very much literal. And further, Pius XII, in explaining evolution and what Catholics can and cannot believe, he says that the capital theses of Thomas's philosophy are not to be placed in the category of being debatable. So that's kind of the source of his caution. However, he does advocate for developing a synthesis based on not just Thomas, but the scholastic method. And so that's sort of the reasons why he's a little bit more cautious. But there are other authors who offer more an optimistic approach, specifically Father Marius Tabasek. And it's quite fascinating. I'm probably not the best person to explain it in a classroom, but I'm going to do my best. So Father Marius Tabasek, he gives this reflection on theistic evolution from the point of view of substance metaphysics. So he gives Aristotle's understanding of heliomorphism and how it's relevant to biology today. So Father Marius sees primary matter as functioning as the principle of potentiality, and the form is the organizing principle of that primary matter that gives the structure to the organism and that actualizes that primary matter to make a being. Evolution occurs, according to Father Marius, when that primary matter attains a disposition, the right disposition, receiving a new substantial form and the coming of a new substance. And so this idea that primary matter is within all things that are created, and that as the changes happen, it makes that primary matter disposed, is the word he uses, and more susceptible to that change, to that evolution. He also gets into causality, which is some of the things that which a lot of people were concerned about in trying to adapt the substance metaphysics to the theories of evolution. But he makes the distinction between the per se cause and the accidental cause. Per se causes are fundamental. They're essential causes from nature. So when nature has to act, these causes find expression in the efficient causality of all natural beings. But accidental causes, they only exist within a substance. So this idea of chance and evolution and change, chance always occurs within that per se cause, according to Aristotle, as per Father Marius. So this genetic mutation that occurs through chance, which is necessary for natural selection, has this accidental cause character of causality that exists within the per se cause. And this kind of helps explain the confusion, because there's that principle of proportionate causation, that higher effects cannot proceed from lower causes. And the question is, does this prohibit higher forms and essences from being formed from lower causes? But more complex and more adapted organisms do presuppose a higher perfection of substance, of essence in that. And I think this is what Father Marius was trying to explain in his understanding of Aristotelian causality. And then Father Marius goes into the understanding of Thomas. And Thomas, like Aristotle, he doesn't specifically speak of evolution. He does say that all things in nature come to an end, but things are organized spontaneously in a fitting way. So Father Marius thinks that some of these, that comment can, within that comment, there's some ideas and concepts that Thomas would, if he had access to modern biology, he would be accepting of some ideas of evolution. So while Hoffman, he was concerned and cautious about with the exegesis, Father Marius interprets Thomas's exegesis just specifically from the Thomas's philosophy, rather than just basically on scripture and morals and all that. Thomas sees creation as the cause of existence of all creatures and metaphysical dependence on God. Also, Father Marius draws a distinction between that which is incidental to the faith rather than substantial. Again, Father Marius is much more optimistic in getting this understanding of Aristotelian Thomistic framework of evolution. And Father Marius writes, from this, I infer that forms of heavenly bodies, plants, animals, are reduced from already informed matter. This is relevant to Aquinas' teaching on the hierarchy of degrees in substantial transformation, which agrees with the similar idea of Aristotle described above. So this understanding of Thomas's metaphysical explanation of the creation story leads Father Marius to conclude that Aquinas' system of thought could accept this idea of evolution. So overall, there's still a lot more work to be done, but it seems that within the Thomistic Aristotelian metaphysical framework, evolution, it is possible that we can explain evolution, and there's possibilities for congruence between both. Some authors have presented evolution from the atheistic framework, which we explained earlier, but it's really just doesn't follow. It doesn't seem to follow because there's nothing within Darwin and even the modern understanding of evolution. There's so much more we understand now, and it's really kind of a non sequitur. It doesn't really follow that evolution and theism or belief in God clash. Finally, prime matter already established within a substance can be disposed in such a manner that it can receive a new substantial form and the coming of a new substance. And that's kind of like the summary of what I think Father Marius was trying to get at. So I can take questions if...
Dr. Marlowe?
I think the main point, Christopher, if you're going to write this up, is that you have to be first. I mean, thank you. Very nice presentation. I think that there are 2 points to be made. One is that the main argument isn't that evolution and the nest of theories that go with it make theism impossible. They just make non-theism possible. And I think that's something that needs to be considered as a statement. Granted that Dawkins and Hitchens and some of the others don't take it further, but I think that's the main point. The other is when you're writing it up, you have to be careful to distinguish, and believe me, lots of people do not, the creation of the universe, abiogenesis, and evolution, which are 3 entirely different issues. I understand, and very nice presentation. I'm not at all critiquing it. And it's certainly true that Aquinas tried to understand where science was when he was writing, and undoubtedly would have written his philosophy and theology differently if he had had an understanding of modern science. I don't know exactly how, no one does, but it would be very interesting. But Aquinas certainly is not hostile to science as he understood it.
Yeah, no, yeah, you're right. You cover your points. Could you just explain a little more? Because I didn't completely understand what you were saying a little bit.
Okay, the first was that I think the initial position was that our modern understanding of quantum physics and possibilities for abiogenesis and evolution make it intellectually consistent to be a non-theist. They don't. And then the second part would be that they sort of squeeze God. This is the claim. I'm not making the claim.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They squeeze God into a narrower and narrower box.
Mm-hmm.
And I think rather than saying, well, the people who go to extremes are making mistakes, you also have to, or at least in addition to, you have to deal with the sort of middle position. The second point was that you have to, if you're going to write this up as a paper, deal with the fact that the creation of the coming to be of the universe and the coming to be of life and the evolution of life after it began are really 3 separate, if somewhat interwoven, scientific areas. Obviously, the existence of the universe is a prerequisite for a precondition for the existence of life, and life is almost certainly a precondition for evolution, but they have 3 separate mechanisms.
Okay.
or claimed mechanisms, I mean, depending. And then the last point, which you already agreed with, was that Aquinas was not in and of himself hostile to science. So he's using the best science that he understands, the best science that had been developed, and uses not only Aristotle, but Arabic sources, Islamic sources for his understanding of science. Okay, and that was pretty much what I wanted to say.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you. Great advice for continued research. And we're almost at the end of our time, but we can take Father Giampaolo's question.
Thank you, Chris. It was very, very interesting. I still struggle with evolution, and at least in philosophy, distinguish between formal cause and material cause, because from the point of view of God, and especially for us human beings, you can understand that it's possible to understand that at some point, since the bodies were evolving, at some point God decided to create the first man. But regardless theology, let us say more now in a dialogue between philosophy and science, and also especially for the non-rational creatures, how do you understand this evolution? Because material cause, yes, it allows evolution, but not the formal cause. It's the matter who evolves, not the forms. And you said a little bit at the end of your presentation, you talked about that, but I still struggle with that. How can we say that if there are different species, it means that there are different formal causes, but the source of evolution is in the material cause? How can we argue that from this evolution in material cause we could also have an evolution on the formal cause? I still struggle with that.
Yeah, it seems complex. I don't really know how to explain it. I think it's obvious that it's a struggle even amongst theologians, because you could see the distinctions in the two authors that are presented, Hoffman and Father Marius, where Hoffman was much more cautious, Father Marius was much more optimistic. But I think my goal really of the research really just was to see, is there something to this atheistic explanation of evolution? And if not, can we get to a point of theistic evolution? And I think I think I've reached my goal. Like, do we have some sort of simple way of getting to it? No. But I do think it is possible that you could come up with a good explanation of evolution within Thomistic metaphysics. So,
thank you.
And I noticed Dr. Rose Wiles posted something in the chat, Chris, in terms of continued research, some other authors, scientists in this space. Thank you.
thank you.
They're not all Dawkins.
And then I guess the other point is Professor Rose Wiles is mentioning is that Darwin doesn't have all of evolution down.
Correct. Absolutely.
Right? The genetic framework and then more modern developments have changed
Exactly.
how we think of evolution. So you cannot completely rely on looking at his book as telling you what evolution is about.
Right.
You can only rely on his book as telling you what he thought, or at least was willing to say he thought about evolution.
Right. And even in one of the authors I researched, Marinoff, he said that natural selection is only one of the ways you can get genetic mutations. Migrations of populations can also lead to genetic mutations. I forget what the other two were, but
Sexual selection is one of them.
Yes, exactly.
And
yes.
So the
Genetic drift is the other. I'd love to come over and talk to you guys sometime. It'd be interesting.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
next
be
time
great.
Father teaches it, Lisa, we'll go in and hold a panel.
Awesome.
Well, who knows if I could escape from the library for long enough. I've seen your course. I'd love to come and sit in on it, but it always, I have.
Well, just for 1 hour.
We'll do lunch sometime. How's that?
Sounds good.
Sounds great.
Okay.
Well, thank you,
So I would
everybody.
like to, I'd
Oh,
like
go
to
ahead.
congratulate all of the authors. Lovely presentations. You all are very capable of talking above your slides, if not just reading, but discussing further and dealing with the thoughts that come to you. So excellent presentations. I also expect excellent homiletic preparation, but that's a different question.
Thank you.
Yes, very, very proud of all three presenters. And I think this is a great event, which hopefully in coming years we can continue as a Petersham module. Enjoy the rest of the sessions this afternoon or later this morning even. Take care.
And thank you for a fascinating session.
Bye-bye. Thank you.